There we go. We are recording and we're showing the screen, and I think we're all set. AV, do we look good? I'm going to assume that we look good. So I don't see anything in the Q&A. So ready to get started? All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Leslie Warren. I'm the Dean of Library and Instructional Support at Northern Michigan University. It's my honor to welcome you to our third annual presentation of the Anna and Rich Lundin Summer Research Fellows. Normally we would have this in the library. Of course, this year it's a little different, but I'm happy that we're able to stream it with help from Northern's AV office. They're helping us out tonight. I really appreciate their support. So it's always my pleasure in the library to partner with the honors program to highlight student scholarship. Many of us think of the library as a place where we do our research. The flip side of that is for everybody who's doing the research, they're also presenting their research in the library, because your effort to research something is somebody else's effort to share their scholarly work. And it's always just a tremendous honor for me to bring that full circle, to make sure that we're really highlighting that full circle of scholarship, the finding and the sharing, which is really what we look for in academia. As we get started, I do want to thank Anna and Rich Lundin for their generous support of this program. I know it's incredibly valuable to all of our students to have these experiences that allow them to do their own independent research. As we work through tonight, we will be streaming live as well as recording. Any audience members who have questions for our participants are welcome to type your questions into the Q&A down near the bottom of the screen. There should be an icon for you for Q&A. Type in your questions or comments and I will read them to our presenters at appropriate times during our presentation. If you have any sort of technical issues, you're welcome to let us know that as well, and we'll try to get it cleared up. For the rest of the evening, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Michael Joy, Director of the Honors Program. Dr. Joy.
Thank you very much, Dean Warren. I'm happy to be here in this virtual room with you for our third consecutive Summer Research Fellows Symposium. I'm welcoming you on behalf of all of the Honors Program staff, myself, Assistant Director Anna Zimmer, and Sam Marier from our office. We work together to provide opportunities for our students. And I've been with the Honors Program, this is my 10th year, and every year it gets actually even more exciting and the students do even more interesting research. So I'm very happy to be here today. Many thanks, of course, to Anna and Rich Lundin, who we think are watching this live stream today. Most of you watching, I'm fairly confident, are aware of the Honors Program and what we do here on campus, but a quick refresher if it's necessary. We are a group of about 300 students. We have doubled in size in the last decade. We engage in top-notch teaching and learning in small classes, which students take in order to earn lower division honors. And then many of those students also go on to earn upper division honors, which involves research in their major. Some of the research, perhaps, that they are doing as part of their Lundin Summer Research Fellowship. Our students number about 4% of all NMU undergrads, but they make an enormous contribution to the academic, cultural, and social life of the university, as I think you will see this afternoon. We are here today for the annual recognition of Honors Program students who received the Lundin Summer Research Fellowships. This year, we've had 5 students earn the fellowship. These are all outstanding members, not only of the Honors Program, but of the wider NMU community. They're very involved in a host of other ways here on campus. The research fellowships are competitive in nature, but they're open to all Honors Program students. All of the students here today submitted a proposal back on a cold day in February, and here we are on a warm day in November to talk about their work. The proposals are always outstanding. The biggest issue is always choosing the 5 winners of the fellowship each year. Students use these funds to do a wide array of research. A lot of work in the sciences takes place in the labs here on campus, but students have also made video documentaries of their time in Cuba. They have written drafts of novellas. They have explored the economics of Botswana, the films of Charlie Chaplin. So the message is students in the honors program are interested in a lot of things, and we're here to help them explore those interests. Today, we have asked each summer research fellowship winner to come to the virtual lectern and tell us a little bit about themselves, as well as a little bit about the research that they were able to accomplish this summer, even under the extremely unusual circumstances in which we find ourselves and did find ourselves this past summer. Our first recipient is Eli Bieri. Eli is a 4th-year biology major from Grand Rapids. His project with faculty member Dr. Jill Leonard is entitled Assessing Road Mortality in Ambystomatid Salamander Species in the Marquette Area. Eli, take it away.
Thanks, Professor Joy. So yeah, probably like everyone, my summer plans changed as a result of COVID. My original plan was to spend the summer on Isle Royale National Park, and I was going to be looking at the genetic differences between island and mainland toads. But obviously they weren't running the ferry this past summer, and I don't own a seaplane, so I wasn't able to make it to the island. But it actually opened up some cool doors to do research around Marquette, and I got to do some really fun salamander projects. So a paper I found from 1959 made me interested in a supposed population of tiger salamanders in the UP. So this paper detailed the discovery of what was the only known population of tiger salamanders in the Upper Peninsula. And apparently they're neotenic, which means they never metamorphose into their adult stage. They remain in the larval aquatic stage their entire life, breed in that state. So that's really curious. And an amphibian's metamorphosis is controlled by thyroid hormone. So I was hoping to capture some of these salamanders and manipulate hormone levels in a lab and see if we could induce metamorphosis. So I spent quite a few hours getting permission from landowners on this private lake to allow me to bring a boat and a kayak and a wetsuit. And I spent quite a few hours setting traps, dip netting, and snorkeling around with fins and a mask. Unfortunately, I didn't find any of the salamanders, which was disappointing, but I think it's still valuable because now we know that there's likely no tiger salamanders in the UP, which is it's an important finding for sure. So besides that, over the past few years, I've been working on a roadkill project with blue-spotted salamanders at Presque Isle Park. And we found that hundreds of these salamanders get hit by cars during their spring breeding migration every year. So some good news from that is that we worked with the city of Marquette and actually got a road closure approved this past spring. So none got hit by cars this year, which was great. But in that, I noticed some really strange looking female salamanders. There were these huge, really kind of gray colored ones that just didn't look like normal blue-spotted salamanders. And they were kind of reminiscent of a population that is down in downstate Michigan and kind of throughout the Midwest has never been seen in the UP. And I'd seen photos of these unisexual polyploid in the past. So I reached out to a geneticist in Minnesota, Dr. Rob Denton, and actually sent him about a dozen salamanders in the mail, live salamanders, which you can do. And he confirmed that they are indeed the polyploids. So this is an all-female population, which is super weird to begin with, but it gets weirder. So what being polyploid means is that they have more than the usual 2 set of chromosomes in their genome. And they're able to reproduce asexually, they clone themselves. But they also have the ability to incorporate sperm from males of other species, completely different species within the genus, into their own genome. So you get these really strange hybrid species complexes. So they are able to take the kind of the best of both worlds of asexual and sexual reproduction. So it's really like something from a sci-fi novel. But I think it's pretty cool that the only known population of polyploid salamanders in the UP is right here in Marquette. And if anyone wants to see any of these out in the field, I'd be happy to, take you out this next spring. Just get in touch as a socially distanced activity. So now Dr. Lafferty and I are working on a microbial skin analysis to see if these polyploid salamanders have the same microbes living on their skin as the blue-spotted salamanders, which could yield some cool results. And lastly, I just wanted to say, when you spend a lot of time in the field, you kind of find some unexpected things. And one of those was several albino spotted salamanders, which I think there's a photo on the next slide. And yeah, it's right in the bottom left corner, that really pink looking guy. In addition to that, I found a spring peeper that was mating with a mink frog, which has never been observed in the literature. So I just submitted those as some short natural history notes in a herpetology journal. But that kind of brings me to one of my favorite things about field work, and that's discovering things you weren't looking for. It's just those little surprises that make it worth it. And what I'm doing now, I've been in talks with the Spirit watershed still, and we're hoping in future years we don't have to ever close the road, and we'd like to get some under the road eco passes, which are tunnels that go under the road, constructed to help these salamanders cross. So stay tuned for that. And to conclude, I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Lundin for their generous financial support. I couldn't have done any of this work without that. And then the honors program for facilitating this and giving me a platform to talk about the research too. And then Dr. Leonard and Dr. Lafferty for being fantastic advisors and supporting me through all this. Did I have any questions?
If anyone does have questions, you can type them into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and I will read them to Eli.
Thanks.
All right, fantastic. And that this issue of the salamanders in Presque Isle actually did occupy a bit of media attention last year, as you know. So it's good to hear the scientific side.
Yeah, and it was somewhat controversial too.
Yes. So I like the future plan that you lay out here, particularly given the rarity of this subspecies or type of salamander.
Right. I mean, that really kind of emphasizes the conservation importance, just because it is pretty rare.
We do have a question from the audience. Eli, Margaret Brum wants to know, how many dead salamanders did you find this year compared to the last few years?
Only 2 this past year, and in previous years it was 400 plus, which represented over 10% of the population. And I think the 2 were probably just from foot traffic or maybe bike traffic.
And she's asking to confirm 2 this year versus 400 in past years.
Yep, and that was just because of the road closure. No cars were getting through.
Fantastic. That sounds great, and I'll look forward to seeing what happens on this front in the future. So thank you, Eli.
Thank you.
Next up, I'm happy to present Mary DeBona. Mary is a junior environmental science major from Ann Arbor. Her project with Dr. Norma Froelich is entitled Breaking Through Using Pancake Ice to Monitor Climate Change in Marquette, Michigan.
Thank you. So I'm really interested in studying features of cold weather environments, especially glaciers, but obviously there are no glaciers in Marquette currently. And I wanted to be able to actually go out and collect data outside in the field for my research rather than just conducting all of my research online. So I decided to focus on something that I could monitor in Marquette that's still related to my ice and climate interests. So I decided on lake ice, specifically pancake ice. I started looking around for studies where pancake ice was compared with changes in climate, but little research has been published. So what I ended up doing was more of a pilot study where I just collected data as often as I could. I would go out to Presque Isle and I'd hike from like the parking lot by the Superior Watershed Partnership and hike all the way to Black Rocks and back and take photos of the pancake ice that would accumulate in the coves along the western shore. And then I compared my data or my photos to data from the National Weather Service to kind of see if there were any trends, like climatic trends that influenced the presence or not presence of the pancake ice. But I learned that to produce the kind of research that I had set out to do, the pancake ice needed to be monitored much more frequently because shorter term weather conditions, shorter than those that I focused on, which actually influence if the pancake ice will form, persist, disintegrate, or change into other forms of ice, are initially very important to understand before attempting to use pancake ice as an indicator of changes in climate. As the presence of pancake ice varies much more frequently than I had originally thought. So I learned an incredible amount of information from this experience and a lot about just conducting, analyzing, and doing research on my own. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Besides learning a lot about different types of lake ice, I definitely learned a lot about the research process, which is something that I really wanted to do here at Northern, and this was my first opportunity to do that. I hope to take what I learned from this experience and eventually monitor climate in cold weather environments in other places. I want to thank Dr. Froelich for navigating me through my research, Dr. Susie Ziegler for referring me to Dr. Froelich and helping me to narrow down my interests, because I remember when I first met with her and said I wanted to do the Lundin, I was like, there were so many different routes I wanted to go in, and pancake ice, I don't even know if that was one that I brought up at our first meeting. And Anna and Rich Lundin for funding and making this opportunity possible. And then Tyler Watson for being my #1 supporter, helping me get to Presque and sometimes doing the hike with me and helping me out. So yeah. Any questions?
We don't have any questions posted.
That sounds extremely interesting, and I suspect there will be more to be done on this issue on a day when it's 72 degrees on November 9th. I think keeping an eye on the climate is a good idea. So thank you.
We do now have a question.
Okay.
We have a question to ask you to back up a little bit and explain what is pancake ice.
Yes, I should have done that. So there's like a few different kinds of ways to categorize pancake ice or different sorts of lake ice. It's basically, I don't know if you've ever seen any sort of ice that forms on the lake in the winter, but it's smaller, like it varies in size. It can be several feet long to less than a foot, but the pieces of ice will break apart and they'll bump against each other, and then ridges will form along the edges of the ice, and that's what makes it pancake ice. There's like a few other types of ice, like grease ice, Brazil ice, but I focused on pancake ice because that was like, from my experience going out and just looking at ice before this study, that was the ice that I saw the most often in Marquette. And then some of the times when I would go out, there wouldn't even be pancake ice. It would be like much larger pieces of ice that hadn't really like, because of the water was like fairly still and the waves weren't that big, it hadn't like bumped against each other that much and formed the like raised ridges around them that make them pancake ice.
And then we have, we've had more comments come in through the Q&A. One comment we have from Northern's own Jess Thompson. Jess says she would love to connect with you to possibly do a presentation at the Northern Climate Network. So be prepared for Dr. Thompson.
Okay, yeah, I would love to.
And then we have another question. What about contacting the Coast Guard station for their experience with this type of ice? They have to go out in all sorts of weather and they probably have encountered this ice.
Yeah, I definitely, a lot of my research, I just focused on like journal articles. I didn't even think about contacting any like local agencies with any of their data. Obviously I used like some of like the just data files with precipitation and like temperature and wave. Well, I can do wave because they take the buoys out of the lakes in the winter because of the ice. But like wind data, I got all that from local stations. But that is a good idea, and I should have done that.
And I see that when I advance the slides better, we do have pictures of your pancake ice on this other slide too.
Yep.
It really does look like pancakes.
I agree. All right, well, thank you, Mary, and we'll keep monitoring the Q&A in case people have late-breaking questions, but whenever I teach, I try to have a transition between topics, and I don't know how to transition between pancake ice and Shakespeare, but that's what we're going to do. So our next presenter is Emma Drever, who is a senior English and Spanish major from Forest Park, Illinois, and her research project with Dr. David Wood is entitled Shakespeare and the Law, Lucrece and Rhetoric. Emma.
Thanks, Prof. Joy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending. Thank you to Rich and Anna Lundin for this opportunity. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about my own research interests and the fun limitations that COVID produced, and just where we're going from there. So to start, in the winter 2019 semester, I pursued a study abroad through the Oxford Study Abroad program. I formulated the relationship between Northern Michigan University and the University of Oxford, and I pursued tutorials through New College. A tutorial is a one-on-one session with a professor for an hour or an hour and a half, where they will critique a paper that you've written that reflects research, or in my case, literature and research. In some instances, you will show up to your tutorial and read the paper to your professor, and they'll stop you and correct you as you go and work through your paper that way. In other instances, you'll send your tutor a paper beforehand, and then they will edit it. And during your session, you will argue with them about the different choices you made in the argument of your paper. So for some people, maybe perhaps the beautiful scientists before me, that might sound a little intimidating. For me, this was great. I'm really talkative. I love to argue. So this kind of experience was exactly the kind of academic enrichment that I needed. And it's completely due to the honors program that I had this opportunity to go there and study. So when I applied, they asked what you're interested in, what you want to take classes in, because individual professors throughout the entire University of Oxford have individual research interests, and then they'll try to pair you with the best fit. And I was kind of like, well, I really like Shakespeare. I really like to read him. And I know that there are lots of legal impacts in his writings. The stage that most of his plays were performed on is right by all the law schools. So I was like, well, I also like the law. I also like to argue. I did debate in high school. So I'm just going to put Shakespeare in the law and see what happens. Not knowing that this is like a completely developed field that I've completely become in love with. But I got paired with tutor Professor Lorna Hudson, who actually wrote the Oxford Handbook of English Law and Literature from 1500 to 1700, which is basically my favorite book. So I met with her once a week over a 10-week term, giving her a different paper on a different topic every week. The way that she taught her class was each week we focused on a different aspect of the law, and then play that meshed well with that topic. She would give me the play and like 15 secondary sources and said, all right, papers due Saturday at 5. It was fantastic. The first week she had me write on Shakespeare's long poem, The Rape of Lucrece, and the rhetorical uses in that. So she was like, all right, read Quintilian and read this 85-page poem and like, you know, I'll see you in a week. And I was in way over my head. I was like, wow, I have no idea what I'm doing. But I spent the week reading and trying to make sense of rhetoric and speech theory that was translated from Latin, from Quintilian, and then applying that to this poem. It's a lesser well-known poem. It's not one of the sonnets. Like I said, it's 85 pages. A lot of Shakespeare professors that I've talked to don't teach it because that woman just rambles on forever and ever. And if you can't already tell about everything about me, I love that so much. I love her speeches. I love the way that she advocates for herself. I love the way that Shakespeare gave this seemingly helpless woman like pages upon pages of voice and like rhetorical prowess. And that's everything that I want to be. And it's been happening for 500 years. But again, going back to Oxford, just really briefly, I only had a week to write this paper. It was like 8 pages. I gave it to my professor and she was like, good attempt, didn't like your argument. And then we moved on to the next topic. And that's how 10 weeks went. So I wanted to use the Lundin to go back into that topic of this poem, the rhetoric that she used. I mean, I read as much as I could, but I definitely didn't read enough. And there was so much here that I felt was important to who I am, to what the field is, to what like gender study is. So this is the proposal that I submitted, was to go back into this paper, to look at earlier editions of the poem, to look at several editions of the poem, look at different rhetors and their theory, and just produce some work about what it means that this married off woman has these rhetoric ramblings for several pages and then spoiler alert, dies in the end. And the marriage and all's well that ends well, I'll come back to that a little bit, but that was another one of the papers I produced during my tutorial, was the idea of what is a clandestine marriage, what is a legal marriage, what is marriage with witnesses in front of God, in front of the law, with exchange of tokens, and all that kind of stuff. So that was another topic that I had explored in this class. Could you go to the next slide, please? So I submitted this proposal in February and I was very blessed to win. I was just super excited, in case you can't tell, to just like explore all these things that I really liked. Yeah, and then COVID happened. So I was actually in Boston presenting my True Marriage and All's Well That Ends Well paper at the Northeast MLA conference when NMU released its travel ban. And then I came back to NMU, oops. And I sat down with Prof. Joy and I was like, Prof, like I'm supposed to go back to Oxford to do my research. Like that's the whole point of my grant, is to go to these libraries to look at these old manuscripts. And he was like, well, we'll figure it out. We'll see what happens. Like maybe you can just go on the DL. And yeah, that still hasn't happened. Oxford closed all of its libraries to visitors. They opened up to students in October, but they're in a lockdown again. And obviously international travel has been extremely limited. So has domestic travel. There's a Folger Shakespeare Library in DC that I was kind of looking at, but it's been closed to visitors. And same thing in Chicago. I'm from Chicagoland. There's the Newberry Library there, but it was closed all summer. So I was just kind of, you know, twiddling my thumbs, waiting to explore all of these like great things that I just told you all about. And yeah, so it's November 9th and travel bans are still happening. But in lieu of being able to explore LUCRECE and rhetoric, I was able to expand my True Marriage and All's Well That Ends Well paper. And it's currently submitted for publication through Vernon Press. I'm going to hear back from my publisher by the end of this week to see if there's any remaining edits. And we're hoping that our book gets published in March. So I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to have a published paper as an undergraduate. Like that's a huge thing to add to who I am as a person as I apply for grad school and try to like continue to expand on these concepts that I really just kind of explored very briefly for 10 weeks at a time. Before coming back and like doing all my other things with my other degree and my other responsibilities on campus. So I'm just looking forward to the time to continue to expand papers, submit them for publication, and just engage with other scholars in the field. And I'm currently pursuing whatever graduate opportunities I can find. I applied for the Rhodes Scholarship to go back to Oxford, and I'm looking at a lot of PhD programs across the country to explore early modern drama in English and Spanish, and gender performance and the impacts of that on post-colonial American literature, because like gender and literature and English and Spanish, I love it all, and I want to keep exploring it and making meaning of it. So this was like a great focus step, even though I haven't taken it all the way yet. I'm excited to keep moving forward and letting my goals come to fruition. I'll stand open to any questions. Sorry, I know I talk really fast. I just really like Shakespeare a lot.
And we do have a question for you, or at least a comment. Let me see if I can get this for you. The comment is from Margaret Brome, a community member. She says, very interesting. If you're going to continue Shakespeare in the law, please read his play Measure for Measure, which is all about the law. Being a lawyer myself, I really appreciate the nuanced arguments that Shakespeare made concerning the challenges to a society as to how strict they are in enforcing the laws.
Oh, 100%. I actually read Measure for Measure in my Shakespeare class that I took last winter, which was the 5th one that I've taken here. And then I'll take my 6th one during my last semester next year and just try to like continue to make these connections. But I mean, it's transformed the way that I look at literature so much, like the exchange of vows between a character and what marriage means, what its economy means, what love means in that sense. It's a really great entry point for me, and I appreciate your insight. Thank you.
And Emma, I think you and Margaret are in the same fan club, because she responds, excellent, it's my favorite Shakespeare play.
Oh, hooray.
Fantastic. I do remember that conversation with you, Emma, after you came back from Boston. I guess for the benefit of any administrators who might be watching, I don't remember saying you should go on the DL to London, but this being recorded.
You were like, it's independent, it's privately funded. I cannot tell you what to do or what not to do. And that's pretty much how it went.
So Emma, if you ever want opportunities on the DL again, you'll want to make sure that you don't have conversations like this in recorded webinars. Just
okay, for sure.
Pro tip.
It's forgotten. Everything is forgotten. Okay. Next, we'll move on from that. Next, you're about to have the rare thrill of hearing me speak a little bit of German. Junior History and German Studies major Jacob Lippert, who hails from Green Bay, Wisconsin, will present his project undertaken with Dr. Anna Zimmer, which is entitled Es wird alles wieder gut, Reconstructing Gender for a Post-Nazi Society in the Heimatfilme of 1950s Germany. Jacob.
All right, thank you, Profe, and your pronunciation was perfect. So the inspiration for this project started last year, my sophomore year. I took a class with Dr. Zimmer about great works in German literature, and the whole class was kind of structured around the German idea of Heimat, which translates directly to home. And Heimat has a very specific cultural context in Germany. It's kind of this idea of home that harkens back to these rural childhood fantasies, and it kind of arose as a reaction to the industrial reforms of the Industrial Revolution, just people who wanted an escape from modernity. And so Heimatfilme are a genre of films that emerged in the 1950s directly after the fall of the Nazi regime and the end of World War II. And this was a very chaotic time in German society. Most of the country's major cities were destroyed. Obviously, the entire political leadership was arrested or dead. And there was occupying armies all over the country, and the country was eventually split up into East and West Germany in 1949. So Heimatfilme are a genre of films that kind of focus on rural settings, happy endings. There's not much plot to them. Basically just a lot of boy meets girl stories and just like traditional clothing, singers, just stuff to distract Germans on both sides of the Iron Curtain from the reality that was the occupation of their countries, the destruction of their cities, and the fact that they had to deal with the legacy of the Nazi crimes that many of them had been partly aware of, and some of them were just beginning to find out about. So we watched one of these films in Dr. Zimmer's class, and I just became really fascinated with the genre, and I knew that I wanted to do my project on Heimatfilme. I wasn't exactly sure what direction I wanted to take. And then I read a paper or a book that noted that 70% of Heimatfilm ticket buyers in Germany in the 1950s were women. So I became really interested in looking at these films from a gender perspective. I looked at the female characters in these films, and these are the questions I wanted to answer. So to what extent did Heimatfilme attempt to construct a new ideal of femininity for post-war East and West Germany? And then connected with that, how did the portrayal of women reflect and influence the social and economic aspirations of real-life women, the film's viewers, in the divided Germany of the 1950s? I approached this project with zero background in gender studies, but I think I managed to get some really cool insights out of it. If you want to switch the slide. So I watched 4 films, 2 each from East and West Germany. And while I was doing that, I read a lot of secondary sources about the gender politics of post-war Germany, which were extremely complicated. So in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, there was an extreme gender imbalance in Germany. Women outnumbered men by several million, both in the East and the West, because so many German men were either dead from the war, or most of them were in prison camps. And many of these men did not return from Soviet captivity in particular until 1955, 10 years after the war ended. So you have an extreme surplus of women who have lost their husbands, their fathers, their brothers. All the men in their lives are gone, and they were saddled with the kind of burden of rebuilding Germany, which many of them took part in physically. There was the famous case of the Trümmerfrauen, or rubble women, who were contracted by the Allied occupation authorities to clean up the mess from the bombing raids in all the German cities. And all of this led to kind of a distrust that existed between women and men in early 1950s Germany. The Nazi regime had emphasized extreme masculinity as the ideal for their society. And because of the failure of the idealized Nazi male to protect women from the invasion, the occupation, and the abuses that were in many cases carried out by Allied troops, the German women tended to, and there was a trend of mistrust of their husbands, fathers, and brothers when they returned from the war. The divorce rate in West Germany in particular got extremely high towards the end of the 1940s and going into the early 1950s. So knowing that, and knowing that women represented the vast majority of audiences for Heimatfilme, I wanted to inquire, what were women getting out of these films? Why did they keep coming back to them? And what did they see in the female characters that are often the protagonists of these films? So both in the East and West German films, I found the identities, desires, and even appearances of female characters are characterized by a tension between progressive modernity and patriarchal conservatism. And these trends kind of act like a tug of war in basically every female character in these films. So the modernity manifests in the fact that you mostly see these women wearing very modern fashions. They have jobs, they drive fancy cars, and they're very resourceful, vivacious personalities who can kind of fend for themselves, really. But then the patriarchal conservatism shows up in the romance plots, because Heimatfilme were not just trying to construct an ideal of new femininity, they were also trying to rescue the idea of masculinity, which had been shattered by the defeat of the Nazi regime. So you get these romance plots of these very like manly men who are like the pure source of emotional support for these female characters. And they all end with the women having to be basically saved by her boyfriend, and with him kind of reassuring her that es wird alles wieder gut, which is the title of my paper, and which means everything will be fine in the end, which is the closing line of one of the films that I watched. So what I found is that, or what I concluded is that the female audiences of Heimatfilme were primarily drawn to the films by the progressive femininity that the characters portrayed, kind of the modern access to new technologies, fashions, jobs, and economic independence, rather than the patriarchal overtones of the romance plots. And I came to this conclusion because towards the end of the 1950s, when the German economic recovery was complete, and this created a ton of economic opportunities for women, female employment skyrocketed, especially in East Germany, because of the socialist economic system that was employed there. Heimatfilme began to fall out of fashion, and the divorce rate, which had gone down towards the middle of the 1950s, started going up again. So the suggestion from those trends is that after the modern comforts that were portrayed being enjoyed by female characters in Heimatfilme became available to the real life women who were watching those films, that fantasy became a reality for them, and they no longer were interested in the kind of patriarchal romance plots that were kind of the other side of that fantasy that was portrayed in the films. And that's what the third bullet point is articulating. Once the aspirational features of Heimatfilme, the material comforts, the lack of male authority, the employment that these female characters have in the films became a reality for their female audiences, German women no longer needed these films as to show them like what their futures could be like. And the commercial viability of Heimatfilme dipped significantly in the early 1960s. If you want to switch the slide again. So some challenges that I had with this project were I wanted to spend a lot of my time at the NMU library this summer, and that was closed, so I couldn't get any physical resources through there or through Melcat or any of the library loaning services that are normally available to students. So I used the money from the fellowship to purchase my own research materials, and I can't thank Rich and Anna Lundin enough for that. That made this whole project possible. I definitely am interested in taking this topic, the topic of reconstructing gender and gender relations in post-war Germany further in the future, maybe not just focusing on Heimatfilme as a genre, but in the greater cultural, I guess, continuum of those early post-war years in general. And what I'm really interested in doing is getting more access to German language, secondary and primary sources on the topic, which I was not able to do this summer. I think that getting access to what German scholars have written on the topic would broaden the horizons of this inquiry so much, as obviously the research that has been done in Germany on this German topic is going to be a lot broader than the English language research, which is what I had access to. But I enjoyed doing this project a lot. I would like to again thank Rich and Anna Lundin for the opportunity to pursue this project, and Dr. Zimmer for giving me the inspiration for it and helping me the whole way answer my questions and solve any problems I had with my research.
Well, that is fantastic. I don't think we have any questions at this point. One just popped up, and Dean Warren, you're in charge of the questions, I think.
As I figure out how to unmute with all the buttons. All right, we do have a question. Wherever else you publish this work, please use your work to update the Wikipedia article on this Heimatfilme subject. Your in-depth analysis should be part of people's understanding of this film genre.
Yeah, the English language Wikipedia for Heimatfilme is very vague, so I agree with that sentiment.
And Jacob, on behalf of the library, I'm sorry that you had to spend money on getting library resources or things that we would have normally provided for you. I hope that we don't have to have a problem like that again in the future.
That's completely fine.
All right, wonderful. Well, I want to make sure we have time for our final presenter. So let's move on to the final presenter, who is junior political science major Daisy Lupa from Saline, Michigan. Daisy carried out research under the mentorship of Dr. Carter Wilson on the topic of the means to match their hatred and examination of Islamophobic rhetoric in State of the Union addresses. Daisy.
Awesome, thank you so much. So, I examined Islamophobic language in State of the Union addresses, as you said. And what brought me to this was like kind of an interest in rhetoric and a concern for the direction of, presidential discourse, and also an interest in 9/11 related discourse, which Anna Zimmer is partially responsible for since the class that I took with her freshman year. So what I did was I analyzed the 2002 to 2020 State of the Union addresses for Islamophobic language. And there's a lot of different kinds of speech that can count as, Islamophobic language, from like blatant hate speech to just accidental stereotyping. So this was a huge broad category that luckily I had some really useful sources that I broke down into kind of a typology. And that's what I used to study this. So my project really, fortunately, was not super impacted by COVID. I could still work with the wonderful Dr. Wilson on Zoom, and most of my research and materials were available online or through the lovely Lydia Olson Library. Could I get the next slide, please? Awesome. Yeah, so I found that, all three presidents I was researching did engage in some kind of Islamophobic rhetoric in one form or another in their State of the Union addresses. And, since these are formal speeches that are, addressing the nation, most of the Islamophobia was in these forms of like these constructed narratives about why the United States was involved in Muslim majority countries. So with President Bush, I found that he kind of posed this as, a moral conflict. On one end, through the structure of his sentences and the way that he linked certain words, he had America and Christianity and goodness on one side of a binary. And on the other side, he had Islam linked with, countries that we were currently in conflict with, and the idea of like moral badness. So this definitely fed into some negative stereotypes about Islam. And then, when Obama took office, he moved past some of the 9/11 related rhetoric that Bush had, and more emphasized, qualities of American exceptionalism. He kind of took away the religious elements and concentrated on values, but this still fed into like this kind of implied Islamophobic narrative of, the difference between Christian majority countries and Muslim majority countries. Then finally, Trump continued the same kind of narratives that Bush and Obama pushed, but he focused on the violent and destructive eradication of Muslim leaders and American superiority. And this was he definitely used the most prominent racist and xenophobic language in all the State of the Unions. I think it's also important to just touch on why this is important, since ultimately these speeches are just words. But they do reflect the very real actions that are taken by these administrations. And the State of the Union address kind of informs the concerns of Congress and the American people. And the purpose of these narratives, Islamophobic or not, are to make this compelling story that the American people are going to consume that's not quite as complex as real world politics. So by making these narratives and by implanting these, whether consciously or not, by implanting these Islamophobic dog whistles and references, these presidents are creating a narrative that is very pleasant for Americans to consume and very easy to understand, but might be brushing over a lot of important parts of our conflicts in these areas. And also continuing Islamophobic stereotyping and that kind of thing. I think there's still a lot of area for research here, and I would love to continue doing research on this. I think that you can investigate more connection between presidential rhetoric and hate crime, and presidential rhetoric and public understandings of these things. Right now, I'm working on publishing this paper in some undergraduate journals that I've been investigating. and it's really exciting. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to the honors program for the opportunity, to Dr. Wilson for all his advice and expertise and his much needed encouragement. I'm really thankful for that. And of course to Anna and Rich Lundin for making this all possible. So thank you.
Wonderful. I'll pause a moment and see if any questions emerge. Did you you read all 18 or so speeches?
Oh yes, I read them and I watched them. It was a lot of hours.
Wow, that's impressive. A question has surfaced.
Yep. So Daisy, Professor Zimmer would like to know, have you considered looking at State of the Union addresses prior to George W. Bush?
I did consider it, and honestly, if I had had more time, I probably would have looked at some addresses from before 9/11 so that I could compare them better. But I felt like what I really wanted to investigate was how each president treated Islamophobia in our nation differently. But if I had had more time, I definitely would have wanted to look at how it changed pre and post 9/11.
And then we also have a comment. We have an encouragement for you to please keep doing this in future State of the Union speeches.
I'll definitely keep an eye out for this kind of stuff. Thank you.
Well, fantastic, wonderful work for all 5 of you. Speaking for the honors program, we're very proud of you. And for our viewers, I guess I would just say that these 5 students are excellent examples of the kind of work that is done by honors students in general. So you've had the chance to hear from 5 of them, but there are 295 others who are also doing interesting work. So thanks to all of you who are supporting the program. I do want to thank a few people. First, Dean Warren, who has been running the Q&A, among other things tonight, and the Olson Library for their continuing support of undergraduate research and the honors program. So thank you, Dean Warren. Pat Lakeinen, who is the Assistant Director of Audiovisual Services, who helped prepare or prepared this live stream. Didn't help prepare it, he prepared it. Sam Marier in the honors program office did a lot of work to prepare for this event, including the preparation of the slides that you've been seeing tonight. And of course, and probably most importantly, Anna and Rich Lundin for their continuing support of the program. The Lundin Fellowships are a signature program in the honors program. I checked my email today, and I started with the honors program in 2011, and the Lundins appear in emails going back to 2011. So it's been a long relationship between the program and the Lundins. So thank you from myself and from the entire program. And of course, thank you to those who have been watching tonight, wherever you are. Ordinarily, we now make a joke about how many snacks are left, but there are no snacks. So I guess maybe take a moment to reflect on what you've learned from our 5 presenters. I think they're pretty inspiring, and they inspire me to want to learn more. So thank you to all of you, and good night.
And we do have a thank you from a 1993 graduate who thanks us for the opportunity to view this event. And she says NMU students are amazing. And that does seem like the appropriate summary for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We will make the recording available soon. You can watch the honors Facebook page as well as the library's Facebook page. For sharing that link, and we'll try to distribute it in other ways as well, but I'm fairly confident that we'll have those recordings available in those ways. So thank you, everyone, and good night.